You're listening to Popcorn in Orbit, a podcast for sci-fi lovers of all galaxies, hosted by filmmakers Jeremy Major and Ian P. Causer.
All right, welcome back to another exciting conversation here. It's Jeremy in Canada. I've got Ian with me in the UK. Hello, Ian. How are you?
I'm good. Thanks, Jay. How are you?
Awesome. I'm very well. And of course, we're excited to talk today a little bit more about science fiction and movies in general, and all kind of from this perspective that we are filmmakers. So today is a particularly exciting episode because we have a guest. This is new. So we've got with us today Aaron Lam. Aaron, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
You are an author. You are a filmmaker. You're a composer yourself. You are a marketing executive. You do all these things. And I want today to talk about some of the books you've written because I think they're really relevant to this ongoing conversation we have here. The first book I want to talk about is one that you wrote with Colin Chilvers, who sadly we just lost a couple weeks ago.
Yes.
And it's called Believing a Man Can Fly, Memories of a Life in Special Effects and Film. And then the other book you've got that I think is incredible is Composing Adventure, Conversations with Composers About Great Adventure Scores. And you've really connected with a lot of composers, and they tell their stories about some of these scores. And I know you're a huge enthusiast of movie scores.
Yes,
and
that's
so
right.
Anyway, we're going to get into all this stuff. Yeah. So first of all, welcome. And maybe first just you can talk to us a bit about Colin and your relationship with him.
Yes. Well, for those of you who might not be familiar with Colin Chilvers, unfortunately, we did lose him just a couple of weeks ago. I'm still kind of in shock about it.
I bet.
He was a good friend, a lovely human being, but also a legend in terms of the special effects industry. To give you a little bit of background, the very first movie I ever saw in the theater was Christopher Reeve's Superman the movie back in 1978.
Yeah.
I believe I was 5 years old. It had such an impact on me seeing it on the big screen, and it remains my favorite movie of all time. Now, flash forward to, my goodness, 15 years ago or so, through friends of mine, I discovered that Colin Chilvers, he had won the Academy Award for Best Special Effects, along with 5 of his colleagues for Superman the movie. I had learned through another colleague that Colin Chilvers was retired from the film industry and living not far from me, just outside of Niagara Falls, Ontario, and that just blew my mind. So I got Colin's contact information and I called him up and I said, I am the world's biggest fan of Superman. Is there any chance I can take you out for a coffee? I would just love to just hear some of the stories about your career. He worked on movies, like his first movie he worked on was 2001: A Space Odyssey as a production assistant in the art department. He was a special effects supervisor on the Rocky Horror Picture Show, Inspector Clouseau. He worked on Battle of Britain. Some of his more recent films that he worked on as special effects supervisor were the original X-Men, Shoot 'Em Up, Bride of Chucky, which he said he had a lot of fun on. But he was also a very prolific director. He had directed a lot of music videos and TV commercials, but his big one, he directed Michael Jackson's music video for Smooth Criminal, which was a part of the Moonwalker feature film. So anyway, I was a fan of his on so many levels. So I called him, asked if he would be interested in getting a coffee. And to my surprise, he said, well, you want to just come over? You doing anything on Saturday? The Tour de France is on. We can watch that and talk about my career if you want. And I'm like, yeah, okay, sure. And I went to his beautiful house on Lake. I'm trying to think what lake it is. This would be Lake Erie.
Yeah.
And he was just so genuine, so kind. And he's like, oh, do you want to see my Oscar? It's over there. It's on top of the TV. There's my Grammy and there's my British Academy Award. And he was just super nice. And we kept in touch after that day. I was gobsmacked. He was just so kind and so lovely. And he was he was thinking about putting together a biography, and I immediately offered. Part of my background was writing, and we spent, I believe, the better part of 6 years together working on his biography, and then trying to sell it around to publishers. We were lucky to get a publisher called Bear Manor Media in the United States to publish it. So
you met up with him like in Niagara Falls area, which like he was originally from England, and was it through Superman that he found his way to this area, was it?
Yeah, he was from London, and he had to come over to Niagara Falls to film a couple of scenes for Superman 2.
Superman 2, right.
And that's when he he fell in love with his lovely wife, Colleen, who was working at the Niagara Parks Commission, and he had to work with her to secure permissions and all that. I think there was a long-distance relationship for several months, but then he decided to move permanently to the Niagara Falls area, which is where he stayed for the rest of his life. The funny thing is, when he had decided to move, he had an offer to do to be the physical effects supervisor on this little film called Raiders of the Lost Ark. And he read the script and said, "Well, it's kind of silly. That means I'm going to have to spend another year in England." And he passed on Raiders and decided to come over.
Yep, the things we do for love, eh?
Yes, and then years later, I can't remember if it was Pinewood Studios. He was filming a commercial there, and they were doing a huge studio purge back then. And he remembers seeing them carry the Lost Ark of the Covenant out into the parking lot and burn it in a pile of trash.
I could have it behind me. I could have that. It would sit there, and that's tragic. Because I guess did ILM do Raiders? I think they did, didn't they? Eventually,
they
Industrial Light and Magic did. Yeah. So did he regret that? Was that one of those? Was it a funny story to him, or was it a sort of, oh no, damn it, what did I do? So how did he feel about that?
Well, what's funny, I think he did find it funny. I do think there's some regret because, as he said, back then, no one thought of that any of these movies would have any impact. They thought, oh, it's just another stop on their career. And he often told me, he said, standing on the set of The Fortress of Solitude, shooting Superman and Superman 2, he said all of that was junked. And he said if he just pocketed one crystal, how much could he sell it for?
And there's great pictures in this book too, of Richard Donner and them, standing around kryptonite and, various things. Just talk to me about your kind of style for how you write these books, because it seems sort of very interview based. Yes,
it's varied a little bit. My first nonfiction book, Believing a Man Can Fly, was written. I collaborated with Colin, and we wrote it from his point of view. So it's first person point of view, and that worked really well. But my next two books, Composing Adventure, and an upcoming book that I'm working on with, which is a biography of composer Cliff Idleman, who is best known for composing the amazing score for Star Trek VI, are actually Q&A based. And I just found that format really captures the voice of various individuals. Jeremy would know this. When I meet someone in the film industry that that I'm so excited to meet, I just totally geek out, and people find it funny, myself included, how I suddenly sound like a 5-year-old. And I wanted to capture that in the books, the sense of excitement. And I find you can get that with Q&A, and it doesn't necessarily have to be proper grammar, and it can be very informal. So that's the style I'm using.
And so is it that childlike enthusiasm that brought you to these people? Like, let's talk about some of these composers that you sat down with and how you chose them.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, my next nonfiction book was Composing Adventure, and I grew up, just like a lot of movie fans. And Ian, I'm sure you can relate. The great scores of John Williams, Jerry Goldsmith. Unfortunately, we already lost Jerry Goldsmith many years ago. I managed to interview a lot of composers I admire, and a lot of these composers, compose I don't want to insult any of the work they've done, but what I'll say is fantastic scores for films that may not have been as critically or commercially as well received.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I managed to interview Bruce Broughton, who did Tombstone. And Ian, I see your Tombstone poster there, and he's lovely. Dennis McCarthy, who wrote more music for Star Trek than anybody else. Craig Safin, The Last Starfighter. Lee Holdridge, who did The Beastmaster. Robert Folk, who did Police Academy. Just tons of composers. And of course, that's where I met Cliff Idleman. We talked about Star Trek 6. But yeah, I do think it's this childlike sense of wonder. As I mentioned, I'm working on a book with Cliff, and I remember like wearing out the audio cassettes on my Sony Walkman, listening to the Star Trek 6 and Christopher Columbus soundtracks that he composed. And little did I know that, all these years later, I would be collaborating with him on a book. So it does really make me feel like a kid.
Yeah, that's amazing. I feel like the composer is often not that visible. You know what I mean? What was it like for these guys to have somebody reach out to them and want to hear what they have to say?
Yeah, it's really amazing. There were some who perhaps aren't as well known in the mainstream, but have a big following in the soundtrack community. There's a wonderful composer from Paris, France, named Frédéric Talgour. And he's not as well known over here, but he some of his earliest scores, he scored episodes of the Young Indiana Jones Chronicles, and he did. And I think, admittedly, he'll say that not all of his movies were that well received, but he did this fantastic score for this Charles Band-produced film called Robot Jox. And I absolutely loved it. And when I told him that I go around the office whistling the Robot Jox theme, he was just shocked that I actually remembered that and actually saw that film.
That's cool. That's really cool.
I interviewed the great Lawrence Rosenthal, who did the music for the original Clash of the Titans and the theme for the Young Indiana Jones Chronicles, and he's in his 90s, and he just told me he said I'm surprised you remember this work I did half a century ago. And these people, they're all so grateful. Every single one of them was lovely.
Yeah, that's amazing. And I know you talk about how important it is to you to have like a tangible copy of something.
Yes.
Like the DVD with the booklet and you can read through it. It does sometimes feel that like that's something that's been lost these days with all the streaming and everything else. There's nothing to collect.
I totally agree. I'm wondering, Ian, what your thoughts are. Now, I don't know. I know you're a big movie buff, but are you? Is having that tangible item on your shelf important? For me, it's so important.
It is. It's So I'm just trying to tot up the amount of money I wasted on VHS. So I probably had about 1,500 VHS, and then DVD comes in, and then I probably rebought every film I had on VHS on DVD, and now streaming's here. So and you can't give these things away now. You can.
Yes. Yeah.
You go to a car boot sale. I don't know does that translate to Canada? Car boot sale, like a garage sale,
like a yard,
a yard sale, something like that. You'd be lucky to get 50 cents for a DVD. But I like the look of the collection on the wall, And
yeah, that's right.
So having that tangible thing is important. But when it comes to soundtracks, I love the accessibility we have now that I can just go onto Apple Music and type in Alexandre Desplat and it will come up with his latest soundtracks, because for me, it's the number one thing I listen to when I write my screenplays is soundtracks from other. That's what I find so inspiring. For some reason, if you listen, I love music, but if you're listening to music with lyrics, it doesn't open the imagination to the same extent as listening to a composer. So right now I'm listening on a loop to Nicholas Britell, his name is.
Yes.
And he's done the Andor music, and that's what I'm listening to right now. And I've watched the series 2 or 3 times. I think it's just incredible. So when I was growing up, finding a CD that I wanted, in a HMV over here or a Virgin Megastore was really tough. So I grew up listening to John Williams because I'm a huge Spielberg's my guy. But I remember desperately searching, because I also love Westerns, desperately searching for Ennio Morricone CD in the 90s. Because to me, his sound was so unusual. I've never heard anything like it before or since. He's almost like an auteur of a composer, because you hear it, even if you don't know the tune, you can immediately go, that's Ennio Morricone. And his use of noise, you think about the good, the bad, and the ugly theme. I mean, some of the stuff that's in there is like a horse neighing, and it works so brilliantly.
This is in the soundtrack, these kind of noises.
This is the soundtrack,
like the music,
that I wanted a CD of Ennio Morricone's music from Fistful of Dollars, Good, the Bad, the Ugly, Once Upon a Time in the West, and you just couldn't get it. So I'm kind of 50. I get the wanting the tangible thing, but I love the fact that I can go onto iTunes now and just type in Ennio Morricone, and all of his music's there instantly for me to stream. So the accessibility of it makes up for the lack of the tangible thing. I imagine, I don't know this for sure, Aaron, you can tell me if I'm wrong, but I'm imagining it starts for the composer by watching a rough cut of the film, sitting there watching it, and then the music comes to them as they're watching the film. Is that the process?
Well, it's very interesting. It a lot depends on the individual director and the arrangement. One reality is that digital technology is allowing directors and producers to fine-tune their edit right until the last minute. Whereas back before the digital age, composers often wouldn't start actually composing. Like, they would get general ideas, but they wouldn't start timing things out until the picture was locked. Because back when they were editing with physical film and all that, it was if it's locked, it's really hard to undo. But now with digital editing, you can just click undo. And one challenge for composers is when directors are trying to fix their films. So you hear some stories of up until a few days before opening day, and then they'll go to a composer and say, "Can you come up with something for that scene?" And so the time that composers have to actually compose the score has gone down dramatically for a lot of composers. I think you can just hear the richness when a composer has time to really sit with that work and let it infuse in their being.
Yeah, which is so true throughout the creative process. Eh? Like even I find it, directing something, it's like, as much as you want to just go out and do it, there is something about that time that passes, that where you sit with it, you read it again and again, and you know what I mean? You're right. It like kind of gets into your molecules more so, and you have more insights about how to do it better, and
It seems to me like you're asking them almost to produce first draft. As a writer, your first draft's never going to be the best draft. You need to rewrite and rewrite and rewrite. So you need time to be able to do that. You can't say, write that, and you've got 2 weeks, and then expect it to be brilliant. I don't believe any writer in the world could do it, because it's the rewriting process that improves the work.
I think there's something interesting about like sort of the more traditional way of doing the orchestral music for a score, where you have these different performances to choose from. Like, they're all performing together at the same time, as opposed to today's sort of multi-track approach. And so each take is going to be a little bit different. And then as a filmmaker, you've got to choose, well, which take supports this, the best, right?
Yeah, there's a story in my book, Composing Adventure, in which Cliff Idleman talks about doing his score for Christopher Columbus, The Discovery. And Cliff talks about recording the big epilogue of Christopher Columbus, The Discovery. And it's a long piece. I believe it's 10 minutes or something like that. And you have to hit certain timings in the film, and yet keep the integrity of the sound, so that even apart from picture, it all sounds great. And I talked with Cliff about how challenging it can be to do long pieces. And sometimes you have so many musicians. Sometimes you have upwards of 100 musicians, and they're charging by the 15-minute increments. And sometimes you just can't get that whole thing, so you just redo, this from this bar to this bar, and later on you'll edit it in. But sometimes it just never quite aligns, and it's always better if you can get everything in once. But it's just not always possible because you're dealing with a live orchestra. And the other thing is, there is really no rehearsal time. Once that orchestra is on the clock, usually they run through it once or twice. They're spot readers. And by the second or third take, they're recording.
That's amazing.
Wow.
And especially with some films that may have a slightly lower budget, sometimes all you have is a couple of takes.
Aaron, a couple of questions for you about your favorites. What is your favorite score, and what is your favorite science fiction movie?
I do consider Superman the movie to be science fiction, so I would call that my favorite science fiction movie. I always find that a very difficult question to answer as to my favorite score, because I find that different scores they fit different moods, and they fit different time periods in your life, and even just what you're doing. I think I'm probably very similar to Ian in that I love to write to orchestral music. One interesting note is probably the majority of scores I own are for films I've never seen.
Oh, wow.
And so once I get interested in a composer, I'm actually more interested in the music, and then if I like the music, I'll see the film. But I have a huge James Horner collection, and more than half of those scores I've never seen the film. I just love the fact that I can create my own images in my mind by listening to the music. But I would say my two favorite scores overall are Superman the movie by John Williams and Star Trek the motion picture by Jerry Goldsmith. Those are my two personal favorites. To me, those two scores have everything. They've got big fanfares. They've got tender moments. They've got sad moments. Those two are just spectacular, and they both came out like within a year of each other. To me, the late 70s and the early 80s were just spectacular. Yeah, how about you, Ian?
I was just going to ask you, Jay, what's your favorite score?
Oh gosh, I don't even know. I'm going to deflect that question.
I'm going to put a guess and say, I'm going to guess, Jeremy, that it might have something to do with dinosaurs.
Yeah, he does love Jurassic Park, doesn't he? Sci-fi score or score generally. If my favorite score
really.
ever, anything, all genres, Raiders of the Lost Ark. Sci-fi, I'm probably going to go Blade Runner, Vangelis. It's just so. It's again a bit like Morricone. You're listening to Vangelis. Is that a good thing, or I don't know? But it's so unique. And I remember Denis Villeneuve saying that he was asked the question on Blade Runner 2049, are you going to go back with Vangelis? And he said no. And I thought that was an error at the time. But then when you listen to the score of 2049, you're like, it's clearly Vangelis inspired. He didn't try and do something completely new, completely different. But I've got that on my phone as well, and it'll pop up on shuffle when I'm driving, and it takes me straight to that picture, that LA skyline and flame burping into the sky and the neon. Just a few bars of it. But it's just, to me, it's pretty unique, that sound, I think, and it sits in that early 80s. It sits there perfectly. But I wouldn't have it as my ringtone, whereas I've had the Raiders March as my ringtone. I've had, because John Williams did the Harry Potter theme, didn't he, as well?
Yes.
I had that as a ringtone for a while. So when it comes to ringtones, it's John Williams or Ennio Morricone's Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. Vangelis just gets you right into that Blade Runner world so quickly.
Now, I mentioned earlier that, there are wonderful composers who do great scores for films that may either rightfully or not rightfully are underappreciated. Have you ever heard Morricone's score for the little-known Italian film, I think from 1981, called The Humanoid?
No, I haven't.
They just released a new edition of it on CD, and it's It's similar to, I would say it's similar. It has a lot of electronics and very strange sounds, but it's a very unique listen that it is kind of in the Blade Runner vein. And the humanoid it's starring Richard Kiel, who played Jaws in the James Bond films. It's a little known Italian science fiction movie.
I literally bumped into Richard Kiel at a convention once. No, I mean like bumped. Like I was coming out. How do you not see that man? He's about 7'3", I'm 6'2", so I don't look up very often. But I come out this door. I was carrying a tray, and I came out the door and bumped into this guy. And it was literally like in the movie. You just look, and then you just keep going up and up and up. And I was like, "Oh my, I'm so sorry." He didn't have the metal teeth in, thankfully, and he was really lovely about it. But of all the celebrities that you can physically not see, you wouldn't think it would be him, would you?
What is it about that era, the 70s, 80s, 90s? Was it just because we were young, or there's something different about scores and films in general?
I think the industry was changing. Lucas, Spielberg, Coppola, Scorsese would come along. The whole industry was just and they changed it, and everything with it, I think, and great directors like Richard Donner and Brian De Palma, and it had gone from this studio system of sort of rinse and repeat, where the studios controlled everything, to these kind of. It's hard to believe now because they're all probably in their late 70s or 80s, but they were rebels, weren't they, back then? They wanted to do things their own way. I think of George Lucas specifically, the struggles he had making Star Wars, and. Like, my joke is whenever anybody says, "What's your favorite indie movie?" I always say Empire Strikes Back. And they're like, "No, independent movie." I said, well, George made it with his own money. He wanted creative control. So to me, that's an indie film, Empire Strikes Back. And it's the greatest indie film of all time. You've got to feel for the indie genre there competing with that. It was sort of a revolution that started in the 70s and continued into the 80s, a revolution within the film industry that changed everything.
Quite often those genres, like the science fiction genre, for example, with the exception of maybe 2001 and Planet of the Apes, was not really considered in the late 70s until Star Wars came along, wasn't really considered a lucrative genre. You read these stories of the Fox executives who, for the most part, really didn't have faith in Star Wars. And they're like, "Oh, what? You want to have a grand symphonic score that sounds like Robin Hood for a space movie? That's not what a space movie sounds like. It's supposed to be dark and depressing." There's
a definite change in the sci-fi genre. You're right to point out 2001. That was kind of like an outlier, an anomaly to that point.
Yeah.
A serious sci-fi film made of high quality by a revered director, which have not necessarily had been before. Like in the 50s, I'm thinking about like Steve McQueen's The Blob and Tarantula, which I think Clint Eastwood was in, and Clint Eastwood. It was very kind of hokey, childish kind of stuff. Buck Rogers, Flash Gordon, that sort of stuff. It's strange how the serious sci-fi, respected sci-fi, came around at that time. Other than those two outliers that you pointed out, Aaron, other than 2001 and Planet of the Apes. So in your mind, Aaron, is that because the studio thought it was they'd lose money? Was it a financial decision that sci-fi was looked down upon, that they didn't, or was it a creative decision?
For a couple of reasons. One is I think its association with comic books was a big thing. Comic books and pulp fiction. It's strange because comic books are just such a accepted part of our culture nowadays. When they first came in the 30s and 40s, they were really looked down as basically disposable trash. And there was a lot of science fiction in comics at the time in the history of comics. So there even came a point in the 1950s when there was a very, very conservative government in power in the U.S. where they started banning comics for violence and things like that.
Really?
It was just always, there was something sort of disreputable about that genre in general. And then on top of that, you have they're just science fiction films, if you really want to do them well, are just so much more expensive. And so, the chances of you recouping your your costs when you have to build your own worlds, or sometimes you're entirely new worlds. I think for the most part, it's a risk that people didn't want to take. So you do see that in the 70s, after 2001, there was quite a bit of science fiction, but a lot of it was very earthbound. So you have things like Soylent Green, and you have things like the Omega Man, things that take place in post-apocalyptic Earths, where it didn't require to create the filmmakers to create brand new worlds and things like that. I had a wonderful conversation with Nicholas Meyer for my latest book about Cliff Idleman. And Nicholas Meyer directed Star Trek II and Star Trek VI, and a wonderful gentleman. And he talked about how Star Wars created a need for what he calls, Nick Meyer always calls it the rummy tum tum score. He said Star Wars, basically Star Wars created, the excitement about the big orchestra and the big, fanfare at the beginning, and how basically for the next 10 years, there were so many films that were trying to emulate that sound. And that's my passion point. I love finding these obscure Star Wars type sounding films, even if it's for terrible films. Ian, do you know? Okay, very few people know this. If you ever want to watch a movie where a young David Hasselhoff fights stop motion animated robots with a lightsaber, and his father is played by Christopher Plummer, who plays the Emperor of the Universe. There's a 1979 Italian film called Star Crash. In every measurable sense, it's one of the worst movies ever made, but it's so much fun to watch. And on top of that, it has a brilliant score by John Barry.
Oh, wow.
Wow.
I also had an opportunity to speak to David Hasselhoff at a convention. Now, I'm obsessed with Star Crash, and there are 3 different versions of it on LP with different art. And I took him the Belgian version, and he was at a convention in Niagara Falls, and I genuinely love this film. And I was kind of afraid that he would think I'm mocking him.
Yeah.
Because the film it's just terrible. And so I walked up to him, and I wasn't sure how he'd react. And I said, Mr. Hasselhoff, I just wanted to let you know this is one of my favorite films growing up. And before I could finish, he looked, Star Crash! Oh my God, he said, I was a kid when I made that. That was so much fun. We got to hang out in Italy. Oh man, they filmed that movie for like 10 cents. That was great. And he was so enthusiastic, and he said, oh, I'm happy to sign this for you. And to get back to Jeremy's question of what it is about the 70s.
Oh, don't bother. This is way more interesting.
Another quick story. So Peter Bernstein, who Jeremy mentioned before, so Peter Bernstein isn't as active as a composer now, but he composed a lot of film and television back in the 80s. He is the son of Elmer Bernstein, the legendary Elmer Bernstein, who did the score to the Ten Commandments and Ghostbusters, and fantastic. But Peter Bernstein was an active composer in the 80s. He's since become a very successful record producer and a concert producer. But I spoke to Peter Bernstein. Ian, are you familiar with a Canadian shot science fiction movie from 1983 called Space Hunter: Adventures in the Forbidden Zone? Just from your expression. Okay, fantastic film. It's I like it. Maybe it's not a fantastic film. It's a very strange. The filmmakers decided to try and combine Mad Max and Star Wars. So it's basically a post-apocalyptic other future.
There's the pitch, the comparables. Mad Max.
The elevator pitch. Yeah.
But it has a fantastic score by Elmer Bernstein. And Peter Bernstein was actually an orchestrator on that film. And I was so excited to talk to him about his legendary father. But of all the films, after we recorded, he was amused that I was so excited about Space Hunter. It's like, really? Space Hunter?
Because my 2 favorite Elmer Bernsteins are The Great Escape and Magnificent Seven. Oh. So if you've done and in Britain, The Great Escape theme is probably top 5 iconic. We all whistle it at sports events. It's so iconic. So to talk to him about, what was the movie called again?
Space Hunter Adventures in the Forbidden Zone. Yes.
He might be quite
Unforgettable.
chuffed about that, though. Yeah, everybody always asks me about The Great Escape and Magnificent Seven. So well, let's talk about this movie.
I think everyone's getting a good sense of Aaron's love for obscurity here. In fact, I remember a while back, Aaron looking for, because I've known Aaron a long time, and we've worked together on a number of things, and I remember him looking forward to going home and watching whatever obscure film it was on VHS on his tube TV by choice.
Yeah,
Is that still your platform of choice, Aaron?
You know what? My tube TV after 27 years gave up the ghost. So I
just don't make them like they used to.
You know, you're saying about the orchestral size of Star Wars. My favorite TV theme growing up was Battlestar Galactica, the original Battlestar Galactica.
Yes.
And that is an incredible score.
Yes, I was fortunate to interview him as well, a composer who isn't as active anymore, named Stu Phillips, who is probably best known for writing the theme to Knight Rider.
Oh, he wrote Knight Rider as well.
Yes, and he was the main composer on the Fall Guy TV show.
Really? That's cool.
And I interviewed him, I want to say about 4 or 5 years ago. Lovely gentleman.
I bumped into, and I wasn't meant to, but I bumped into Dirk Benedict. He was over in the UK, and I bumped into him, and he's still a very striking man, very handsome man, a lot taller than I thought he'd be.
Do you have a vision problem, or why do you keep bumping into people?
That wasn't a literal one. That wasn't a literal one. Yeah, I'm like walking towards this guy, thinking he looks like Face. He looks like Face Man. And you should get close. Yeah, it is Face Man. And you know that horrible second, right? I can't call him Face Man. What's his real name? And then it pops up, Dirk. Mm-hmm. I said, Mr. Benedict, love to meet you. What you doing in the UK? And he said, you're an A-Team fan. I said, I love the A-Team, but I prefer Galactica because he was Starbuck. He was thrilled that I mentioned Galactica. Absolutely thrilled. It's like the A-Team's persevered over the years, but Galactica hadn't for some reason. I loved it as a kid. It was my favorite show. But I've got that the theme tune on my iTunes, and when that blasts out, you have to play it loud. It's incredible, absolutely incredible. Did you watch the new Battlestar? I know that it's a few years old now. Did you watch the remakes of Battlestar Galactica?
Yes. Yeah. You know what? Yeah. And I enjoyed that as well. I think nothing compares to your childhood.
Yeah, exactly.
And I absolutely love the new version as well. It was a much different take. To me, that was really interesting. But to me, the old Galactica is just like this warm blanket and a warm hug you can return to. I have an interesting story interviewing Stu Phillips. So the composer of the 2000s version of Battlestar Galactica was a wonderful composer named Bear McCreary. So Stu Phillips scored the original, and Stu said that at first he didn't like this new Battlestar Galactica. He's like, they're changing everything. I don't like it. And then out of the blue, Bear McCreary called Stu Phillips and said, I'm a big fan of your original score. I'd like to. I think this was for the series finale. They weren't really. The producers didn't want him to really use the original theme. And
that was going to be my question to you. Is it only appears at the end of the final episode?
They snuck it in at one point where there's a scene where there's a custodian mopping, and he whistles it.
Oh, really?
Just for a few seconds. Yeah. But the producers didn't want any comparison, so they purposely said, we don't want you to do this. And then for the finale, Bear McCreary said, I want to reference it. It just feels right. Yeah. And he said, but I want to get the blessing of Stu Phillips. So out of the blue, he called Stu Phillips and said, I'd really like to use the theme to end off the series. Would you mind if we meet up? And Stu Phillips was he was like, I'm just so honored. So Stu Phillips invited him over, shared some of his score sheets, and they talked about it. And he said, he was just stunned that this young man would think of asking his permission, and they become friends since then.
So what were you watching when we were watching Battlestar Galactica as a kid? What were you watching, Jay? Did you watch any sci-fi TV?
No. Little House on the Prairie.
Okay. Okay. Aaron's just left for everybody.
I love Little House on the Prairie. I just every other episode, one of them either fell down a well, or got caught in a snowstorm.
So tragic.
I always just felt really bad for them. Yeah.
Oh yeah. So tragic. No, I was big into the Muppets.
Oh yeah.
This might be a good point to kind
Until how old?
Oh, you were still going on that.
Yeah.
Until how old? What, the Muppets? Still watching it today.
Okay, cool. Yeah.
Yeah. Muppets in Space. Great sci-fi movie.
Nobody's done that, have they?
Well, it's a lot of fun.
Yeah.
It's okay. You don't have to agree with this just to make me feel better. Listen, Aaron, thank you so much for being here and chatting with us. I want to mention the books again because there's so many great stories in them that any movie fan can enjoy. Believing a Man Can Fly, Memories of a Life in Special Effects and Film, which is about the late, great Colin Chilvers. And also Composing Adventure, Conversations with Composers about Great Adventure Scores. Remind us again what the new book's called and where people can find out more about you and your work.
You can find out more about me at AaronLamAuthor.com, AARONLAM author.com. The upcoming book is coming out in 2025 sometime, and that I'm working on with composer Cliff Eidelman. And our working title is Beyond the Undiscovered Country.
Ooh,
so
awesome.
Look out for it. It'll be available through book outlets. I'm happy to share my love of film music with all of you.
Thanks so much, Aaron. It's brilliant to talk to you.
Terrific. Thanks so much. Yeah, it's been really great.
Thank you.
Ian, as always, a pleasure.
And yourself, Jade. The Muppets. The Muppets on the Prairie. It's on the Prairie.
Don't underestimate the Muppets. All right. Thanks, guys. We'll talk to you real soon.
No.
Popcorn in Orbit is produced by the Shooting Eye and Ice River Pictures.